Carly Newberg sighed and closed the thick book on government contract law that dominated her desk. It was time to go home. She was in her office at the school where she worked as a law teacher, but this book was for one of the law firms for which she did research on the side. If she left now, she would catch her regular train home. Her husband had left on a business trip that morning, but she didn't feel the aversion to it that she had in the early years of their marriage. She found 2 weeks away from her husband to be refreshing, and she couldn't wait to get home. They met in college. Her husband, David, was a couple of years older and about to graduate from business school, while she was still unsure of what she wanted to do with her life, halfway through her degree. She smiled, remembering the night they met at a frat party. If only everything could remain as perfect as that night, she thought sadly, her smile fading as she turned off the light and locked the door behind her. They had been a couple for 18 years, almost half of her life, she realized with surprise. She loved her husband more than anything in the world, but over the past few years their marriage had begun to fade. They had been married for 15 years. In the early years of their marriage, David supported her pursuit of a law degree, but recently she was earning more than him as his company ran into financial difficulties. Last year, she began taking on cases from a firm she worked with several years ago to make ends meet. David was a perfectionist and avoided admitting his shortcomings. This was the root cause of the problems in their marriage, and his recent dependence on her was the latest and greatest reminder of his failures. There were many things she loved about her husband, but his stubborn, proud behavior was not one of them. Walking around campus, she headed to the station for her ride home. The evening chill reminded her that mid-autumn had already arrived. She was comfortable in a light sweater over a blouse and a knee-length skirt, but she would need a coat soon. Seeing the approaching train, she hurried towards him, knowing that he would not wait long. She made it just in time, falling into an empty space, a little out of breath. Almost immediately, she felt the gaze of the man opposite her, studying her skin. Carly was in her late 30s, with dark hair that fell just past her shoulders and smooth white skin that was trying to maintain its light summer tan. The short run in the cool weather had left her cheeks slightly pink, which she knew men find irresistible. 5.5 feet tall, with an athletic build thanks to a religious devotion to running and a pair of breasts that looked proportionate on her slender figure, she was pretty but not exactly beautiful. David liked big breasts, but he still fell in love and married her, which she reminded him every time he hinted at getting them bigger. The man opposite, with short dark hair slightly gray at the temples and a magnum-like mustache, clearly admired her charms. He was not one of her regular evening travel companions, people who became her silent and nameless companions. Sitting in front of her today was a girl she called Red, a short girl with many piercings and a star tattooed on the back of her head, with bright red hair when Carly first saw her. This week her hair was green, but to Carly she will always be red. On the other side behind Magnum was Big Beard, an elderly, balding man with a scruffy beard. He wore a wedding ring, and she always wondered how his wife could allow him to walk around with such a beard. There were a lot of people she recognized, but Magnum was definitely new. Turning her blue eyes towards him, she blushed under his cheeky gaze and showed her dimples nervously. He also wore a wedding ring, but looked more than willing to forget about his wife for one night if he was given even the slightest chance. While reading her book, she often glanced at him, becoming nervous under his inseparable glance. She was not afraid of a crowded train, but would change seats if there was an empty seat. As the train began to make stops, she said goodbye in her thoughts to familiar faces, knowing their stops as well as her own over the years. As soon as another seat became available, she moved to it, but Magnum's eyes followed her. The closer the train got to her stop, the more she prayed that it would get off soon. Relief filled her when he got up a few stops before her and got out. Even from outside the train, he looked at her until the train started moving. Getting off at her stop, she ran to the bus that was supposed to take her home. She had her own car, but traffic and parking in the city were a nightmare, so she rarely used it to commute to work. Magnum's glances left her unsettled, and she was still nervous even though she knew he wasn't there. It wasn't that she sensed anything dangerous about him, But he shared more than just a mustache with Tom Selleck. He was endowed with rugged good looks and broad, masculine shoulders. Carly had to admit that she found him attractive, and that was the danger. His gaze left no doubt in her mind that he was ready to share more than just views of the train. Even though their marriage had been far from perfect lately, she had never thought about cheating on David. But then again, she was sure that most people didn't plan to cheat, it just happened. Well, nothing would happen between her and Magnum, no matter how warm his handsome face left her feeling inside, despite the chill in the air. Entering home, she locked the door behind her and leaned against it with relief. Safe inside, she hoped David would call tonight, even though he didn't call her every night on his trips like he used to. Magnum's face kept popping into her head as if she had seen him before as she walked into the kitchen to pour herself a drink. She pulled out David's good scotch and poured herself a strong drink, downing it in one gulp. He really didn't look that much like Magnum. It was the mustache that made her make the comparison, but his face was just as handsome and familiar. She might have seen him on the train before, but she didn't think so. Either way, he's gone, and she's unlikely to see him again, so there's nothing to worry about. It was the small part of her that worried that tonight was the last time she would see him that made her pour herself another drink. As she tried to concentrate on preparing dinner for herself, she found it impossible to get his piercing gaze out of her thoughts. Carly knew she had a good figure and a pretty face, but it was easy to forget when her husband no longer showed much interest in sex. As she chopped up some vegetables for a little stir-fry for herself, she began to wonder who he was and why he was so obviously attracted to her. She couldn't imagine ever cheating on David, but the feelings that another man's interest aroused in her were unexpected. Thinking for a moment, she couldn't remember the last time her husband had looked at her with such desire. When dinner was ready, she ate in the living room while watching TV. As she flipped through the channels, she seemed to find reminders of her crush everywhere she turned, instead of the relief she had hoped for. Everywhere she looked, from the local news anchor with a mustache to the Jeopardy host, although he looked different after he shaved his mustache, she found vivid reminders of the man she called Magnum. Finally switching to the children's channel, she could only watch it for a while until it started to hurt. Turning off the TV in disgust, she put the dishes away in the kitchen and went upstairs to her office. Shortly after marrying David, they bought this large 4-bedroom house, filled with dreams of the children they would raise here. As Carly walked into what would be the bedroom for one of her children, she felt a sadness wash over her in a way that hadn't happened in years. For her, law school seemed like something to do while she was pregnant, but she became a member of the state bar and began working full-time at a law firm before she had to admit that something was wrong. David was supportive of her, willing to do whatever he could, as he said, but how quickly that changed when the doctor told them the problem was him, not her. Her husband refused to acknowledge any failure and was unable to ask for help. Suddenly, he said, they didn't need children in their lives. Carly loved him enough to not insist on it, but now that his interest in her was waning and he was spending more and more time on the road trying to save his drowning company, an empty house was her cruel reward. Every day, every single day, she wished that their problems were related to her, so they could at least try some treatments. She shook her head, thinking about what people had told her. Oh, Carly, you're so lucky that you can travel all the time and not have to worry about dragging the kids along. Or, you have such a great figure, Carly. I wish I looked the same as I did 20 years ago. But I never got my figure back after having children. Are you lucky? Great figure? People can be so damn stupid sometimes. She knew that none of them meant to be hurtful, but if they knew how much their words hurt her, she would never hear them again. Sitting down at the computer, she logged into the school's secure server and downloaded several files that she needed to look at tomorrow. It was going to be a busy few weeks, and every little bit helped. If they failed to settle one case, she may have to spend several days in court on top of her classes and other work. But it was useless to concentrate on work. With an empty house and thoughts of a strange man showing interest in her, she suddenly thought that it was not too late to have children. Shaking her head, she stood up to pour herself a glass of wine. Carly loved her husband more than anything in the world, despite his foolish pride that cost them so much. But that night her thoughts led her down a dangerous path. With a full glass of wine, she returned to her home office and closed her work papers. Even though she was busy, her heart just wasn't in it today. Checking her email, she read a message from her sister inviting her to dinner this weekend. She smiled, thinking about her niece and nephew and the opportunity to spoil them again. Every time she felt depressed about not having children of her own, her sister's children received a big surprise from their favorite aunt. Where had she seen Magnum before? The more she thought about it, the more she became convinced that she had seen his face before, and it wasn't on the train. Checking her browser history to find the page she'd been reading a few days ago, she dove into the site and was finally able to put the questions of who Magnum was out of her head for a while. When she finished with the site, she left the office for the night, turning off the lights. After filling her bath, she looked at her reflection in the mirror as she took off her clothes. Her friends were right. She looked almost the same as she did 20 years ago, but she would give almost anything for a scar from a cesarean section or a stretch mark from a woman who had given birth to a child. Submerged in the warm, soothing water, she dove headfirst under the water and, emerging, tucked her wet hair behind her ears. At the beginning of their marriage, David gave her as much sex as she wanted, but lately he separated her attention. She was filled with thoughts of Magnum. Later, as she dried herself off, she felt colder and dirtier than when she entered the water. Maybe David will call tonight. It would be nice to hear his voice, she thought. But she had no hope for this. It was their first night apart on this trip, and she was sure he enjoyed the distance as much as she did. Calling him at the hotel was out of the question. She hated disturbing him unless there was something really important, and if he wasn't there, he would call her as soon as he got the message, no matter the time of day. As she brushed her teeth, she avoided looking at the guilty expression in the mirror. She decided not to dry her hair, planning to take a shower in the morning to deal with unruly hair and not look at herself now. Throwing the towel at the foot of the bed, she climbed under the covers. Carly closed her eyes tightly, but sleep did not come. The bed she usually shared with her husband seemed empty that night, emptier than at any time during their separation. Looking at her watch in disappointment, she saw 11:17, 11:44, 12:20, 12:52, 1:09, 1:36. Finally, she fell asleep. The next morning, she was glad she didn't meet Magnum on her way to work. The morning class allowed her to keep him out of her thoughts all day. That day, she had 2 visits to law firms, and she asked her secretary in the department to try to fit in a third, which arose at the last moment. While eating lunch alone in her office, she checked one of their credit cards online and realized she needed to contact the bank for more information. "Hello, this is Carly Newberg. I need a fax of our purchases on this card for the last 2 years. Can you do it?" "Great. Of course, I can confirm any account information you need," she said in response to the employee's questions. "I'm trying to remember when and where we bought this laptop that doesn't work. I lost my receipt, but I believe the store signed us up for their extended warranty, and I wanted to see if it was still in effect before I replaced it. Thank you. You have no idea how much this helps me." "Here's your fax, Carly," her secretary said as she entered the office a few minutes later. "I also scheduled that last appointment for today at 4 o'clock. "Thank you, Janice," she said, taking the fax and looking through it. "This is exactly what I need," she added with a wry smile. That afternoon, she rushed through her first 2 appointments to make sure there was enough time for the last one. It was something urgent that just came out, and the time frame was short. She had less than 2 weeks to get this case in order, and her most important client was counting on her. Heading to the last meeting of the day with documents that needed to be reviewed in her bag, she was met by the company secretary and motioned to the office where she was expected. "Carly, good to see you again. Janice, she said you had something important to discuss with me. I hope it's nothing serious," said her friend and colleague Charlie Dunn, standing up to greet her. Her first job after law school was at Charlie's firm, and he always looked out for her. On the first day they met, she was extremely nervous, but he joked that their names were similar, which immediately calmed her down. "I don't think so, Charlie, but you're an expert on this sort of thing, so I was hoping you could watch it," she said, taking a folder out of her bag. "Let me read this," Charlie said, picking up the folder and looking into her eyes before starting to read. He nodded as he read and raised his head several times, shaking it back and forth, as if contemplating the legal significance of what he was reading. "I guess you're going to try to make sure this holds up in court?" he asked. "Yes," she said with a nervous smile. "Well, it looks like reinforced concrete to me," he said, nodding his head. "Even with the recent changes in circumstances," she asked. "No provisions have been made in this regard. The agreement is clear and precise," he assured her. "I'm sure you'll win this case with your eyes closed, but you know I'm always ready to help if needed." "Thank you, Charlie," she said with a relieved smile. "Hopefully I can hire you to help with this. Then you will have me. Barb and I have the rest of the week off to look after the grandkids, but if you want to stop by tonight, I'm sure we can come up with a good deal in a few hours," he said. "You're the best, Charlie," she said, standing up to hug him. "There's a lot more here, believe me, but I need to explore it first. I think I'll have all the details by Thursday night." "It sounds good. How about 8? The kids should be in bed by then, and that will give us plenty of time to discuss everything," he said. "See you then," she said, putting the folder away on her way out. Carly had been confident in her abilities before meeting Charlie, and now she was confident that they could win the big deal. Of course, he was her friend, but she knew that wouldn't stop him from giving an unbiased opinion. She was confident that they would have something worthwhile by Thursday. Meanwhile, she planned to consult with several more experts on the matter. It was unlikely that they would find anything that Charlie might have missed, but like any good lawyer, Carly prided herself on her thorough preparation, and this case was too important to allow any surprises. It wasn't until she boarded her regular train home and met Magnum's gaze that she thought about him again. Her meeting with Charlie left her in a good mood, so he didn't make the same impression on her as he did yesterday. Giving him the sweetest smile, she tucked her hair behind her ear and sat a few rows ahead of him, smiling to herself while blushing. There was no reason why poor Magnum shouldn't be given a little imagination, considering what she had done last night with his help. The idea of actually doing anything was still off the table, but after the heated fantasies last night, it seemed less foreign than the day before. Looking back, she saw that he got off at the same stop as yesterday. Heading home, she locked the door behind her and sadly looked at the empty house, tears welling up in her eyes. After dinner, she sat in the living room, looking through interior decorating magazines. It was her hobby that filled her free time. Their beautiful home, free of clutter and children, drew compliments, but what she wouldn't give for a box overflowing with toys in the corner that would look completely out of place. She decided that she was going to redecorate some of the rooms when David returned. Carly tried to focus on the patterns and color schemes, but there were too many sad thoughts running through her head, and she soon began to cry. Closing the magazines, she went to bed early. Tomorrow, she had to get up before 6 to go for a run before work. Closing her eyes, she saw Magnum again, but that night she did not fight him and fell soundly asleep. The next morning, she got up at dawn. Putting on her sports uniform, she hurried out the door with a bottle of water. Having run her usual route, she was soon sweating profusely, despite the cool autumn morning. It was just her and the sidewalk, with no sad thoughts or tempting strangers. Finishing the run in a record time, she ran another smaller lap before heading back inside to shower before work. Another busy day with classes in the morning and visits to several law firms in the afternoon. There was so much to do that she arranged evening meetings to quickly discuss a big deal. So far, neither firm had found any potential difficulties that Charlie might have missed, and they assured her there was nothing to worry about. Carly knew there was nothing wrong with the court case, but the fact that all the news so far had been good allowed her to relax a little. Taking the late train home from an evening of meetings, she yawned, thinking about bed. She felt someone's gaze from the side, and before she turned her head, she already knew that it was Magnum. The first evening she had wondered where he had suddenly appeared, but now he was here again hours after her usual trip, There was no doubt that he was watching her. As long as they were in a crowded public place, she wasn't too worried. He continued to look, but today she did not smile at him. There was no point in encouraging him further. Relief filled her when he got off at his usual stop. Even though he was gone, she still looked over her shoulder nervously the rest of the ride home. When she returned home, she decided to go to work by car tomorrow, despite the traffic jams. This will make it easier to get to Charlie's after work. Instead of going to her place first, she could go straight to his house after the last meeting. The early rise and long day left her tired. As she fell into bed after a quick dinner, she thought about Magnum again. It wasn't that she felt like he was going to hurt her. It was that she was afraid of what pursuing him would lead to. Could she hold out until her husband returned, or would she succumb to his silent suggestions? For the third night in a row, she dreamed about him before going to bed, and no matter how many times she banished him from her thoughts, Magnum returned as the star of her fantasies. The next morning, she drove to work in her car, glad to avoid her silent admirer. This was the strangest part of the whole story. He looked at her continuously, but never said a word. His eyes left no doubt about his intentions, and she was sure that the other people on the train must have noticed it too. If he had approached her on the first day, she would have rejected him outright, but now he was gradually destroying her morals one fantasy evening after another. It didn't help that she still hadn't heard anything from David and only saw reminders of the difficulties in their relationship everywhere. All she needed was to hear his voice for him to say he loved her, and Magnum wouldn't stand a chance. What kind of husband goes away and doesn't call his wife for almost a week? She thought angrily. Her morning classes went by in a blur. While eating lunch alone in her office, she closed the door and cried until there were no more tears left. Having poured out her emotions, she collected herself for an important afternoon activity. Walking to the car, ready for the first meeting, she felt a chill run through her skin and knew that he was watching her again. Looking around with a determined look, she challenged him to show his face. As she got into the car and quickly drove away, she prayed that he wouldn't be able to follow her. She never saw him in the parking lot, but the knowledge that he was there left her uneasy. After the last meeting, she called Charlie and asked if she could come a little earlier. He heard the fear in her voice as she told him everything that had happened this week. "Come in, honey," Barb said, greeting her at the door with open arms. "You're safe here with us. This terrible man can't hurt you here," she said, giving Carly the shoulder she so desperately needed. "Charlie told me everything. I can't imagine what this week has been like for you," she said in a soothing voice. Carly looked up and saw Charlie standing a few steps away with a worried expression on his face. Her parents now lived in Florida, but here, with these old friends, she had almost as much support. "I brought a file for discussion," she was finally able to say. "Leave it to me, and I'll work on it tomorrow," Charlie said, and she nodded, grateful for the opportunity to lighten her load. "I fed my grandchildren before bed, but our dinner is still being prepared. You will have dinner with us," Barb said. It was a statement, not an invitation, although Carly would have gratefully accepted it anyway. During dinner, she opened up to her friends, finding comfort in their wise advice. They both offered to do whatever they could to help her, but she assured them that she would be fine. Today, she needed to lean on the people who love her, and tomorrow and in the days following, she will cope on her own. After a few laughs and many tears, she stood up to leave, feeling that she would forever be indebted to her friends for their kindness. "You should stay with us today," Barb said as Carly stood up, looking for her bag. "Oh no, I can't impose," she said, feeling guilty for burdening them. "Nonsense," Barb said, shaking her head. "We don't have any spare beds. Everyone is occupied by the grandchildren, but you can share the bed with me and Charlie can take the sofa for one night." "Really? No problem," Charlie quickly added. "I'm so grateful for friends like you, but I'll be fine at home," she said. "I don't like this at all," Barb said, looking at her husband and waiting for him to act. She shouldn't be alone at a time like this. "If we can't convince you to stay, let me at least accompany you home," Charlie suggested, and his wife smiled and nodded. "Please, you've already done more than enough in one evening," she said. We can't force you to stay, no matter how much I want to, Charlie sighed. Will you call when you get home so we know you're okay? I promise, she said, smiling and hugging them goodbye. She acted bravely in front of her friends, but the journey home scared her. Alone with her demons, she struggled to stay under control. The desire to stop and cry almost overwhelmed her. She knew that David had no intention of calling, and that Magnum would find her again tomorrow. Most of the time, she thought she knew what she would do, but every day that little piece of her heart that was unsure grew larger. When she got to the house, she looked around for a long time before getting out of the car and running towards the house. Fumbling with her door keys, she began to cry before finding the right one and going inside. Frantically setting the alarm off after locking the door behind her, she leaned against the door, breathing heavily. Before calling Charlie, she forced herself to take a few deep breaths, which calmed her down. After finishing the conversation, she went to the bathroom and filled the bath. Before sitting in the warm water, she took a towel and sat on the counter near the sink, where there was good lighting. Tears flowed down her cheeks. The next day, she left the car at home. This meant that she would likely encounter Magnum again, but after a night of introspection, she was no longer afraid of him. No look from him could make her do anything she didn't want to do. Her day followed a familiar routine, morning classes and meetings with law firms in the afternoon. After finishing her meetings early on Friday, she caught her regular train home. Where is he? She thought, looking around the carriage. She looked forward to meeting him, but he was nowhere to be seen. It was for the best. It was dangerous to see him again. Carly knew exactly what she wanted to tell him, but it was easier this way. The ride home was the calmest I'd had all week. She could calmly read a book without anyone staring at her. Getting off the train, she headed to the bus stop. The bus was supposed to arrive any minute according to her watch. Still worried about meeting him, she looked around at the other people waiting for the bus until she was sure he wasn't there. Once she got on the bus, she felt complete relief. After a short ride, she got off and waited for the bus to leave before crossing the road. Making sure there was no movement, she took a step onto the road and stopped. Magnum. He stood on the other side of the road, looking intently at her with his now familiar gaze. All the words she wanted to say to him disappeared from her mind as fear overtook her. Stepping back, she began to walk down her street. Turning her head and looking over her shoulder with futile hope, she saw him walking parallel, his eyes glued to her. She scolded herself for wearing heels today, knowing that they would not give her a chance to escape. They were getting closer to her house, and she was on the wrong side of the road. Carly didn't know what to do. Should I go further to the gas station on the corner? Should I go to the neighbors? Walking close to her house, she saw that Magnum had stopped several houses before hers. At that moment, she was sure that he knew exactly where she lived. Either he would provide her with a safe path, or he would set a trap. Her mouth went dry and butterflies fluttered in her stomach. Taking the keys out of her purse, she ran towards the house. Magnum followed her at a safe distance. Near the door, Carly dropped her keys in nervous excitement and turned around to see that he was only a few steps away. "Who are you?" she demanded. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, raising his hands and taking a step back. "I asked who you are," she said, louder. "My name is John Smith," he answered. "Yeah, well," she snorted, "and I'm Jane Doe. What do you need?" she asked anxiously, pressing her back against the door as he reached into his jacket. "It's just my wallet." "See," he said, waving at them. "Take it and see for yourself," he added, gently throwing it at her feet. "Stay still," she said, crouching down behind the wallet without taking her eyes off it. She took a moment to pick up the keys as well. Opening his wallet, she pulled out his Maryland driver's license, and sure enough, there was his face, John W. Smith. Even in the photograph, his gaze seemed to undress her. "Well, John Smith, what do you need?" "I think it's obvious," he said with a smile that was all too familiar to her. "I'm married," she said, raising her hand to show her wedding ring. "Me too," he replied, showing his ring. "Was your marriage what you imagined it to be?" he asked in a bitter voice. "I don't want anything to do with you," she said. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, taking a step towards her. She saw that he was waiting for her to say stop, but she never did. Now he was standing very close, and her fear disappeared. When he tilted her chin, she knew what was coming next. Leaning down, he stopped with his lips so close to hers. The vile bastard had no intention of depriving her of her honor. He waited until the desire became unbearable, and she had to give it herself. They kissed. They shouldn't have done it here, where the neighbors could see them. Turning her back to him, she opened the door and stepped inside on trembling legs. She didn't need to invite him to follow her. They made love. She suddenly felt vulnerable and ashamed of what she had done. Deep down, she knew she was better than this and wondered what had happened to the woman she once was. After everything that had happened, she hoped it wouldn't be hard to get him to leave. "I knew from the first sight that you would be hot," he said, smirking at her. "What we did here, it shouldn't have happened," she said evenly. "But it happened," he said. "It's time for you to leave," she said as she left. "Don't I deserve to at least know your name?" he asked. "Carly," she said before she could stop herself. She had already shared too much with this stranger. "Carly," he repeated, as if tasting her name. "It's a beautiful name." "You're right, I have to go," he said, looking at his wedding ring. "But is this what you really want?" This wasn't what she wanted. She wanted him to stay, just like in her fantasies all week. Carly wanted to say stay, but it was easier to remain silent and let him do what he wanted. Taking out her husband's favorite scotch from the cabinet, she poured them a glass. It seemed strange to her to share her husband's scotch with another man, but considering what else she shared with him, it didn't seem like a big deal. John accepted the glass with a smile and clinked it with hers. He didn't propose a toast because, really, neither of them had anything to celebrate at that moment. Having drained the glass, he held it out for a refill. Carly poured him another and put the bottle away, not wanting him to get drunk when she barely knew him. Taking a moment to study him up close, she found his masculine appeal incredibly sexy. His strong jaw and thick mustache made him look so masculine, and she felt the strength of his powerful arms and broad shoulders. John was taller than her husband and seemed to be in good shape, with a flat stomach under his shirt. Leaving her bag and work papers on the kitchen table, she headed towards the stairs, knowing that he would follow her. She wanted to ask him what he wanted to do, but there could only be one answer. Leading him upstairs, she led him into the guest room. As far as she went that night, she couldn't bring herself to bring him into her own bed. This she could save for her special man. The room looked so sterile and unused that he must have immediately known that this was not her bedroom, but he didn't care where they would have sex. He had helped her more than she could ever imagine, and she could never thank him enough. She didn't know what to say. Reaching into his coat, he pulled out a pack of cigarettes and offered her one. Carly shook her head, but kissed him again and hurried, naked this time, to get the ashtray. After stopping in her bedroom to put on a robe, she returned to the guest room to find John had already left. Looking out the window, she saw him walking down the street. Having locked the door, she sank to the floor, feeling cold from inside. The tears she had been waiting for all night finally came. That night her sleep was marred by nightmares about how David found her in bed with John. In one of them, David had a gun, and he fired. The next morning, she woke up feeling dirty and filled with shame for what she had done. She was better than that. How could she let this happen? There was no use in regretting the past. She didn't usually wash before running, but she felt her skin crawling and took a scalding hot shower that failed to cleanse her soul. Carly loved morning runs. They always helped her clear her thoughts, no matter what she was dealing with, but John couldn't get out of her head. When she returned home, she locked the door. She wanted him again, but she wasn't ready to face him now. In her master bathroom, she filled the bathtub, preparing for a long, relaxing soak. Sitting in the warm water, almost up to her neck, she added hot water whenever the water began to cool. Carly wanted to stay there all day while she struggled with her emotions. As she sank under the water, she held her breath until her lungs began to burn and her head began to spin. Emerging from the water, she greedily sucked in air, ready for what the rest of her life would bring her. Once dry and dressed, She called her sister to let her know she'd be arriving a little early. She still needed to buy gifts for the children and stopped at a toy store along the way. Usually the thought of visiting a toy store filled her with sadness, but today she felt fine. A day after she allowed a stranger to have sex with her, she was already allowing herself to think about her own children again. Even though it wasn't the time of the month when she could get pregnant, just the thought of him made her imagination run wild. With gifts for her niece and nephew, she made the hour-long drive to her sister's house, arriving several hours before dinner. Her sister Cindy greeted her at the door with a hug and immediately knew something was wrong. The children ran up to their Aunt Carly and kissed and hugged her before running back to play with their new toys. Cindy and her husband Steve invited Carly into the house, and although they sensed something was bothering her, they knew they would wait until the kids went to bed to find out more. They sat together in the living room, drinking wine and chatting. When it was time for Cindy to finish preparing dinner with Steve's help, Carly went downstairs to play with the kids. After dinner, the five of them played a board game until it was time for the kids to go to bed. After kisses and hugs, Aunt Carly received thanks for the gifts, and the father took the children upstairs to bed. Carly smiled after them, then looked at her sister's serious face. "Now, what's wrong with you, sister?" Cindy asked when the kids were out of earshot. "Nothing," Carly said, but she knew her sister wouldn't believe it. "You may be older than me, Carly," my sister began with a smile, "but you can't fool me so easily anymore. Will you tell me what happened, or should I call my mom?" Taking a deep breath, Carly opened up and told her sister what had happened this week. In the end, her sister hugged her and cried with her. When Steve returned, she briefly told him what had happened to explain their tears. He reacted with anger, ready to find John and teach him a lesson for hurting the woman who was like a big sister to him. She made him promise not to do it, explaining that it was also her fault. She was pleased to know that they were both ready to support her in any way. Why couldn't her marriage be as good as theirs? She thought with a little envy of her sister and her loving husband. David once held her the same way Steve held Cindy now. Later, over a cup of coffee, when the tears had dried for the evening, they sat and reminisced about the past. Steve and Cindy were high school sweethearts and often spent weekends on the town with Carly when she and David were just starting to date. They laughed, remembering how their father unexpectedly came for a visit and almost caught them together. Their parents did not approve of Carly and David living together without marriage, and would have been completely shocked if they knew that Steve was also visiting with Cindy. Back then, it seemed like they'd all be together forever, but now David no longer came with Carly when she visited, and had barely said a word to Steve the last time Carly had invited them to dinner. Carly suspected that her husband was jealous of Steve because he gave Cindy 2 beautiful children, but never spoke about it. It was already past 10 when Carly put on her coat to get ready to go home. Cindy tried to convince her to stay, but she refused. She assured them that she would be fine and invited them to dinner at her house the following Saturday. The drive home gave her time to think. There was so much to do in the next week, but despite all the appointments she had planned, John continued to occupy her thoughts. He was from out of state, here on business, for all she knew, and had probably already left. The thought that he could disappear from her life so quickly left her with an unexpected feeling of sadness. As she parked at the house, she realized that she had forgotten to leave the light on before leaving. The evening chill was already hinting at night frosts when she got out of the car and buttoned her coat. Steadying herself in the darkness, she tried to get the key into the lock. "I was about to leave," he said from the shadows, scaring the crap out of her. "Oh, thank God, it's just you," she said with relief when she recognized John's voice. "You scared me. You shouldn't have come here again." "You didn't want to see me again?" he asked. "I want to see you," she admitted, "but we can't be seen like this." "Nobody sees anything here," he said, bringing his hand closer to her face so that she could see him. "You know what I mean," she said, smiling in the darkness. "I'll leave if that's what you want," he offered. "You can stay tonight," she said, opening the door. "But next time we should meet at your hotel," she added. She was no longer going to deceive herself about her intentions, and saw that there was no point in deceiving him either. Only when she went inside did she notice that he had brought her flowers. She took them and lowered her head for a kiss. They made love again. She wanted more than anything to fall asleep and dream of a world where her life wasn't such a mess, but she forced herself to stay awake until she was sure he was gone. She needed to lock the door before going to bed. Walking downstairs, naked, she headed to the front door. On the floor near the door, she found a note with the address and number of his hotel room. Smiling, she took it upstairs with her. It was late, and she couldn't feel the shower or bath, so she slept in the guest room. Waking up early in a strange bed, she took a quick shower before going for a run. She thought it was stupid to shower before getting sweaty again, but the morning after her second night with John made her feel dirty. Standing under the warm stream, she shed a few invisible tears, letting the water wash them down the drain. Suddenly, she decided to throw away the piece of paper with his address, although it was already too late. She remembered him last night and was sure that she would go to him tonight, despite how bad she felt right now. As she went out for her usual jog, the rhythm of her steps along the sidewalk cleared her mind. Concentrating on deep breathing and physical exertion, she forgot about John, if only for a short time. When she was forced to think about something, she focused on work for the next week. She will conduct her usual activities all morning, and her afternoon will be occupied with business. There were so many meetings to have, and even more to plan, that it was more than enough to keep her mind occupied beyond her cheating. As that word ran through her head, she stopped for a moment, completely stunned. It had never occurred to her before that this was what it had become. One time it could have been excusable a mistake, but twice without end in mind was an affair that would surely destroy her marriage. When she got home, she didn't shower right away. Heading to the kitchen, she prepared herself breakfast and looked around her dirty kitchen with disgust. After eating, she left her tracksuit on to clean the house, starting with the kitchen. After finishing the dishes, she went upstairs to remove the sheets from the guest bed and took them downstairs to wash. Vacuumed the entire first floor until it was time to put laundry in the dryer. Inspired by her cleaning, she went upstairs and cleaned her bathroom, looking longingly at the tub, knowing that she would soon be able to take a long, relaxing bath. Placing the sheets back on the bed, she carefully looked around the room to make sure everything was in its place before heading to the bathroom for a well-deserved bath. Submerging herself in the warm water for a long swim, Carly sighed and closed her eyes. She thought back to her life with David and wondered where it all went wrong. Was there any mistake she could have avoided? The memories of all the good times they had spent together filled her with a crushing sadness. Tears flowed uncontrollably as she sank into the water up to her chin and hugged herself to drive away the emptiness and coldness in her heart. Carly wasn't sure where her life would take her from this day forward, but she knew that her immediate future included visiting John for more illicit sex. After a long bath, she wrapped herself in a warm, fluffy towel and went to her bedroom. While searching her closet for something to wear tonight, she let the towel slip from her slender body. Looking in the mirror, she turned and squirmed, trying to find something that could push her husband away. Carly had always been observant, which had helped her in her legal career, and she knew that many other men before John had found her athletic figure attractive. As she ran her fingers over her birthmark, she knew that couldn't be the reason. David admitted that he found him attractive from the first night they made love. Her face couldn't be a problem either. She was a bit plain in appearance, with thin lips that she relied on makeup to make them look fuller, and straight, unremarkable hair that was dark brown, almost black, but there were other features that made up for it. Bright blue eyes, a smooth, creamy complexion, and a pair of cute dimples made her look much younger than her age. Although she was 5 years older than Cindy, people often mistook her for her younger sister. The more she thought about it, the more she was sure that the lack of heat in their bed for the last few years had little to do with her. Screw David, she thought bitterly. He got what he deserved in the end. Tomorrow will be a full week since he left on his trip, and he still hasn't called her. There could not have been a clearer sign of how little she meant to him. Once again, she told herself that she would no longer cry for a man who had not shown his love for her for so long. Tonight, when she gets home, she will try to hold on this time. From her closet, she chose a scarlet tank top that showed off her modest cleavage. She didn't feel like wearing a skirt tonight, and while going through her trousers, she found what she needed, a pair of black leather trousers that she hadn't worn in years. They hadn't gone clubbing in a long time, and the last time she remembered wearing them was at a Halloween party 3 or 4 years ago. She knew at first glance that they would still fit her, and she remembered how they hugged her hips and butt just right. Even David might find her attractive in them again. Laying her tank top and pants on the bed for a while, she rubbed some scented body lotion into her skin before putting on the red bra and panty set. Lacy and revealing, it reminded her of the passion she needed in her life. She only truly realized how much she missed good sex only after John had it with her. Perhaps now that she was approaching 40, she was approaching that sexual peak age that she had heard so much about. After putting on the pants, she was glad to see that they still fit snugly, and the bright red tank top went well with them. This outfit was sexy, not provocative and eye-catching. In the bathroom, she was ready for the finishing touches. After sprinkling some perfume, she took care of her face. She didn't need much work, but she did use a little blush to add color to her pale cheeks and eyeliner to highlight her eyes. Her lips were the only feature of her face that made her feel insecure. Applying red lipstick, she smiled to herself and kissed the mirror, leaving a perfect lip print staring back at her. After blow-drying her hair, she used a curling iron to add some volume to the ends of her straight hair. Gathering her purse and keys, she hurried downstairs, putting on her cute black shoes and coat before leaving the house. The hotel where John was staying was not far, but even a short trip gave her too much time to think. The first 2 times she cheated on her husband, John himself came to her. Today, she went to him with one thought in her head. Carly knew their marriage was over before the first infidelity, but that didn't mean it was easy. If it was already over, then pleasure with a man who made her feel so good was something she should have allowed herself. Sunday afternoon traffic was light, and she parked in the hotel parking lot. As she took her place marked for visitors, she wondered how long she would stay here. "Just a second," came his voice from inside as she knocked on the door. He opened it, holding his cell phone to his ear, and looked at her with panic. "What?" he said into the phone, seeming surprised. "Oh, it's just room service," he said, placing a finger over his lips to allow her entry. "Listen, I'll call you back later, okay? Okay, then tomorrow, bye." "Your wife?" she asked, noticing how attractive he looked even in a simple blue t-shirt and jeans. "Yeah," he said, walking past her and closing the laptop before she could look at the screen. Collecting the papers on the table, he stuffed them into the briefcase and put it away. "I was sure that you would come, but I didn't think it would be so soon." "Have a seat," he said, pointing to the chair in front of her. "Do you love her?" she asked, lounging on an unmade bed instead of a chair. "Whom?" he asked, clearly still shocked by her unexpected arrival. "Your wife. Do you still love her?" she asked. "Do you love your husband?" he answered defensively. "I asked first," she said. "I don't know," he said with a sigh. "There are a lot of things I love about her, and I can't imagine leaving her and the kids." He shrugged, trying to find the right words to finish. "What we did, I feel bad about it, but at the same time I can't stop. With you, I feel a spark that hasn't been there for many years." "Do you cheat on her every time you leave?" "Does it matter?" he asked her in response. "No. For me, no," she answered honestly. "There were others, but none were like you," he said. "Yes, of course," she replied with a dubious grin. "So what about you?" he asked. "You were the first. Before you, I was innocent in the matter of adultery, John," she said, turning her shame into a joke. "And your husband, do you still love him?" he asked, sliding his hand higher. "Part of me still loves, but I know that he doesn't love me anymore. Not only does it make what we do possible, but it makes it easier every time," she said, taking his hand and pulling him towards her. The conversation was pleasant, but that's what she came here for, she thought as he kissed her. They made love. Returning to the room, she found him sitting at the computer, closing what he was working on earlier. Whatever it was clearly not intended for her eyes. He was still naked, and that's all she cared about right now. "Your husband doesn't sleep with you anymore?" he asked, breaking the silence. "Yes, he's asleep," she said protectively, but then wondered why she should protect him. "I just never get as much as I need. What about you?" "Me?" he asked again, not understanding. "Do you and your wife have sex often?" she asked. "Oh, my wife," he said, as if she could be completely forgotten. "If I got what I wanted from her, I wouldn't be here." "Well, I think she's stupid," she said. "She and your husband seem perfect for each other," he said with a grin. "I can't imagine my husband doing something like that. He's too much of a perfectionist to stoop to cheating," she said with a sad sigh. "Sorry, I shouldn't have said that," he said, touching her hand. "It must be hard for you." The first time I was terribly ashamed, but that didn't stop me from repeating it again and again. "Can we talk about something else?" she said, shuddering from the sudden cold. She didn't want him to remind her of her own shortcomings. "You look cold," he said, standing up and hurrying to the bathroom. "Here, put this on," he said, handing her a robe. "Thank you," she said. "How about I order us dinner at my company's expense?" he suggested. "What do you want?" he asked, reading the menu when she agreed. John ordered room service for them and put on his clothes for now. She felt strange when they chatted and waited. Sex with him might have been good, but she didn't know him at all. No matter how well he had sex with her, they had nothing to talk about. She wasn't looking for a new man. It may have been over between her and David, but she had time to find new love. The conversation with John was awkward, and she didn't know what to say. There could be no future between them, and she had already decided that she liked sleeping with him enough, which left little to discuss. When the food arrived, she was relieved to have a distraction. Carly hurried to the bathroom when she heard the knocking to hide. The messenger would not know who she was, but she did not want to be perceived as a woman of easy virtue or a cheater, although the latter was true. John called her after the messenger had left, and they sat down at the table in silence, eating. She felt vulnerable, sitting naked in her robe, and couldn't wait for them to have sex again. When both were naked, she didn't feel so insecure. Sitting opposite him, she felt his gaze wandering over her legs and trying to look into her robe at her chest. At least he wanted to see them, and that relaxed her a little. After dinner, John went to the bathroom. Looking around the room for something to do, she wanted to turn on the TV, but decided not to. With a busy schedule next week, she had little time and could use waking up early as an excuse to leave if needed. Sex left her tired and relaxed, but there was still time. How much longer will he be here? How many more times can she make love to him? She heard the bathroom door open and turned to see John undressed again. She smiled. Standing up, she threw off her robe and stepped into his arms. "Thank you for a wonderful evening, John," she said, giving him her sweetest smile. "It was my pleasure," he said with sincerity in his voice. "When can I see you again?" she asked, standing at the head of the bed. "I'll be here all week," he replied. "Just a week?" she asked quickly, although in fact she knew that she was lucky that his trip lasted so long. "Just a week," he confirmed. "We'll have to make the most of this time," she said, leaning in to kiss him. As she turned to leave, she smiled to herself. Carly slept easily that night. Her thoughts were free for other things. David became less important every day. A week ago, if she had been asked, she would have said that she loved him more than anyone and anything in the world, but how quickly everything changed. Now, if she had the chance, she would trade him for John in a moment. She believed that their marriage could still somehow survive, but she was too realistic to give it more than a minimal chance. The next day was a long one, even by Monday standards. All day she thought about meeting John this evening. Time seemed to stand still. It was a pity she was so busy, otherwise she would have canceled some of her appointments, although John was probably busy during the day too. It hurt to think that she could lose him so quickly, but without his brave pursuit, she would never have been able to face the sober reality of their doomed marriage. She was so grateful to him that the rest of the week would be an opportunity to show her gratitude. In a hurry to see John again, she arrived at her train early, but the train was late to upset her. She was about to call a taxi for the expensive ride home when the train finally arrived. The delay made her frown, angry at the wasted time. What if John leaves thinking she won't come tonight? She decided to get off at the stop near his hotel instead of going home. Standing up as the train slowed to a stop, she felt the disapproving glances of some of the regular passengers. Who are they to judge her? They can all go to hell, she thought, leaving the train and not looking back. Just a second, he shouted from inside when she arrived at his room a little later. Long day? He asked, seeing the anger on her face when he opened the door. Oh, John, she sobbed, clinging to his warm torso. SHH. It's okay, Carly, he said, kissing the top of her head. I know how hard it can be, he whispered, misreading her emotions. They spent another night of passionate love. Every night this week, Carly headed to his hotel immediately after the last meeting. Despite the traffic, she took the car to work to avoid another train disaster and the judgmental glances of familiar fellow travelers. Although she was looking forward to their evening together, she dreaded the weekend. John was leaving on Saturday morning after rescheduling his original Friday evening flight earlier in the week so they could have another night together. That Friday, she drove to his hotel for the last time with many conflicting thoughts in her head. She could never thank John enough for filling the void in her heart where love for her husband had once bloomed. 2 weeks, almost 2 whole weeks, and he didn't call her. Well, if this trip taught her anything, it was that living without her husband was not as difficult as she had imagined. Having parked the car, she sat for several minutes, collecting her thoughts. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door and walked towards her lover. Her stomach twisted with excitement as she rode up the elevator. Turning the corner in the hallway to his room, she took another calming breath and put on a smile before knocking on the door. John must have been waiting impatiently for her, because the door opened almost immediately. You look beautiful, he said, taking her hand and sliding his hand down her arm. You don't need to say that, she said, embarrassed and turning away from the heat in his eyes. She didn't even go home after work to freshen up. Today, she looked the same as she did every weekday. It's true, Carly, he said, leaning his head down to kiss her, and she sighed. Your husband is a fool. He doesn't understand how lucky he is. Let's not talk about him, she said, biting her lower lip, looking away from his shoulder. Sorry, I didn't mean to. He began to apologize. It's okay, she said, smiling at him as he pulled away from their embrace. But I'd rather enjoy my time with a man who values it than worry about what tomorrow will bring. Raising her arms behind his neck, she pulled his lips to hers for a kiss. Maybe she was deceiving herself. David had been so cold and distant since his business began to fail that any man who showed even the slightest interest in her would seem stunning in comparison. Sex with a new partner was always hot in the beginning, but who's to say it will last? As good as sex with John was, she wanted so much more than sex. She wanted a new man and a new life. Carly wanted a second chance to have the marriage she had dreamed of since childhood. A husband who cared for her and beautiful children in a home full of love was what she wanted. There was still a chance, but there was no more time to waste with a selfish man who didn't love her. Do you want to go to dinner? John suddenly asked, breaking her out of her thoughts. No, she replied, her mind still racing. I just want to stay here tonight, she said. Then how about I order us something nice instead of room service, he suggested. I would like that, she said, smiling. What should we order? Do you know this city? He asked, sitting down. Do you like sushi? I know a great place that delivers food, but it's quite expensive, she warned. At the same time, she took off her bra and reached for the zipper on the back of her skirt. It's never too early to start seducing him again. You know what you like, so order something good for me too, he said, handing her the phone. After she placed her dinner order, their eyes met. At first, she was embarrassed to be naked in front of a strange man after all these years, but a week of passionate lovemaking relieved her of this uncertainty. Knowing that a man found her so attractive was a huge relief after years of indifference from her husband. Just as she closed her eyes to rest, there was a knock on the door. John, she screamed in panic as he took the blanket to cover his nakedness. "Just hide your face," he said with half laughing. His hand was already on the door, leaving her little time to run to the bathroom. With her head buried in the pillow, she curled up into a ball, but she knew the food delivery guy would still see her. "Put it on the table. Sorry, that caught us in the middle of something." "Ah, yes," the guy muttered. Carly felt her heart pounding as two eyes scanned her bare skin. She heard John's belt clink as he reached for his wallet. "Here you go," she heard John say, then silence for what seemed like an eternity. "Hey, here's your money." "Oh, sorry. Thanks," the guy replied, and the door closed behind him. "Well, I gave this guy the best tip of the night," John said, laughing next to her. "I can't believe you did this," she said, removing the pillow from her head. Her anger had already evaporated, and the adrenaline of being seen in such a state took over her. "Relax, Carly. He only saw an anonymous beautiful ass," he said. "He couldn't take his eyes off you, and who can blame him? The poor guy was probably hoping that I would invite him to join." "Fuck you, John," she said, picking up her discarded clothes. "It was just a joke," he protested. "Maybe if I hurry, I can catch up with him," she said, heading towards the bathroom with clothes in her hands. "Let me go," she screamed as he grabbed her hand. Pressing her against the bathroom door, he kissed her. At first, she tried to resist, but it was too good to resist. "Sorry," he said, his eyes full of regret, apologizing for this and much more. "If you still want to go." Carly dropped her clothes and jumped into his arms. Later, they sat naked, leaning on the head of the bed, eating dinner. They were only sent chopsticks, and John was terribly clumsy with them. After several failed attempts that left his chest stained with sauce, he looked at her helplessly. With sadness in his voice, John mentioned the early flight. She took the hint. Returning to the bedroom after her shower, she walked past her clothes and lay down on the bed, patting the empty side next to her. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I want to stay here tonight," she said in a low voice. "If it's not right, I'll leave, but I'm not ready to lose you yet." "Of course, stay," he said, getting into bed next to her. The next morning, he woke her up with a kiss. Even after last night, she was thirsty even before he left. Reaching out to hug him, she felt her fingers touch the fabric of his shirt. Carly's eyes opened wide in panic. "No, John, you can't leave now," she said, tears starting to fill her eyes. "My plane leaves in an hour," he said. "It's a shame we don't have more time, Carly, but this is the end." "When can I see you again?" she asked. "Again?" he asked, clearly confused. "I need to see you again, John. What we have is special," she said, releasing a flood of emotions she had been trying to avoid. "Forget about your wife and my husband. We have each other." "Look, Carly, it was fun for a week, but—" He was clearly searching for words to explain. "Oh God, I'm so stupid," she said, trying to hold back her tears. "What have I done? My husband." She felt panicked. "I can't believe I did this to him, to us. I need to tell him. I need to explain how sorry I am." "No, are you crazy? Listen to me, Carly." "Are you listening to me?" he asked, waiting for her nod before continuing. "Just because we don't have a future doesn't mean you have to stay with him. Don't tell him anything. There are many men who dream of a woman like you. Sorry it can't be me, but you'll find someone who fits. I will never forget this week," he said, kissing her lifeless lips one last time before leaving. Outside, he took a deep breath. He's done a lot of terrible things in his life, but he'll need the last 2 weeks to forget them. Taking the elevator down to the lobby, he paid the bill and said that there was a woman left in the room who would leave within the hour. Outside, he climbed into a waiting taxi and turned on his laptop, asking the driver to take him to the airport. As soon as Windows booted up, his cell phone rang. It was early, so he immediately knew who was calling. It was time to start making amends to Carly. "Hello? Yes, I'm on my way to the airport now. No, I didn't find anything. Sorry, David. As far as I can tell, your wife only does two things while you're away, running in the morning and staying late at work," he said, watching a video recorded by a hidden camera in his hotel room. This was true until he turned on his charm and seduced her himself. David had hired him before to investigate employee financial fraud, but this order was different. David contacted him a few months ago, looking for a way to end his prenuptial agreement. He had had a mistress for several years, and he wanted to leave his wife for her, but he could not afford to give Carly her share of the business, which was already in financial difficulties. So David hired him as a detective to find dirt on Carly that would allow him to get out of the contract. As in any business, he promised results, and he knew that sometimes it was easier to create incriminating evidence when it could not be found. Carly wasn't the first married woman he seduced to ruin her marriage, but she was the first he regretted later. Just meeting that Charlie guy you called her uncle and her sister over the weekend. Otherwise, she's been visiting law offices since you left. I know this is not what you wanted to hear, he said, closing the video and deleting it from his hard drive. I don't know if you can continue to live a lie or deal with the consequences. I know I guarantee results, but anyway, there are costs. Can I void my check? You know what, David, it's okay. Use another agency the next time you have a rat in your accounting department. I hope you get what you deserve, he said as he hung up and turned off the phone. Looking through the photos he took one by one, he deleted them as he went through them. Poor Carly deserved so much better than that scumbag husband. He wanted to stay, but she deserved better than him too. Taking off his wedding ring, he carefully hid his fake ID. I didn't want him to get caught with it on the plane. The airport was already in sight, ready to send him back to his empty life. Looking around the city, he hoped that Carly would follow his advice and start a new life. As soon as the door closed behind John, a satisfied smile spread across her lips. Where are all those people who said she wasted her time taking drama classes in college? She almost told him she loved him, but that would probably be too much. Hoping that was enough to keep him from telling David what happened, but it didn't matter. Charlie said it was impossible to get out of the prenuptial agreement, and some of the best lawyers in town agreed. Still, it would be nice to see the shock on David's face when she files for divorce and tells him she knows everything. The first night she knew she had seen Magnum before. She couldn't call him John anymore because it wasn't his real name, just like Magnum wasn't his real name. She didn't understand why he was watching her. She soon began to examine her broken marriage from a new angle. Once she knew what to look for, everything became obvious. David had been so clumsy in his attempts to hide what was happening that she felt stupid for not noticing it sooner. This fool even paid for hotels and dinners for himself and his mistress using the credit card they shared. Yes, she never used it, but her name was on the account. David and his obsessive desire to accumulate bonus miles for flights. The thought made her laugh out loud. He wouldn't buy a loaf of bread without using this card. She couldn't wait to tell him that this was the way to expose her. Everything was on the extracts. Business trip to Florida, but visit to a hotel in their state. Conference in Chicago, but a romantic dinner for two at a chic restaurant in the city center. A trip to Montana to visit a sick uncle, but the flowers are from a local flower shop. Flowers. When was the last time he gave her flowers? Maybe some of the trips were real, but she was able to match enough incriminating purchases with the dates in her diary to realize that he had been cheating on her for the last 2 years. She only checked 2 years of credit card statements, but that was enough. Knowing exactly when it started would be even more painful. Despite the lack of passion in their marriage, she did not stop loving him until she realized that he had hired someone to follow her. She could even try to overcome betrayal, but the thought that he believed that she would stoop to his level disgusted her. The entire first week, she didn't know what to do. The support of friends like Charlie and Barb, as well as her sister and family, helped calm her down. She told them all about David's infidelity, and they were ready to support her in any decision. In the end, she decided that there was no better revenge than to sleep with the man her husband had hired to spy on her. That his spy turned out to be an attractive and skilled lover was an added bonus. This was another surprise that she hoped to give in person. At first, she almost felt sorry for David. Carly had never loved anyone the way she loved him, and the thought that she might never feel that way again was sobering. Initially, she wanted to demand only the house, leaving everything else to him, but 2 weeks of rage hardened her heart. She was going to take everything that was guaranteed in the marriage contract, including his half share in the company. In the beginning, David had 3 partners, and they were the ones who insisted on a prenuptial agreement to protect their interests. They all had the same contracts with their wives. Over time, David bought out their shares one by one, but the contract remained unchanged. She was entitled to half of his share. She intended to get every last cent, minus his share of the house's cost. Carly didn't think his business would survive this, but David had no one to blame but himself. If he had spent half as much effort on the business and their marriage as he did on his affair, he wouldn't be in this situation. Carly sat in her office, looking at the computer screen, which showed a notification about an incoming fax. She had prepared the papers to file for divorce, and was now waiting for reassurance from Charlie and the other lawyers who would review her papers. Her heart was pounding with excitement and fear. Today was the day she was supposed to start a new life. She wasn't sure how David would react to her decision. He had become cold and distant in recent years, but their story still held her in its grip. The realization that she was ready to break with the past was both liberating and terrifying. The long years of their marriage, their dreams of a family, and the house they built together, all this now seemed like a distant and alien life. Charlie assured her that she had every right to half of his business. David will be forced to sell a significant portion of his assets to compensate her, and his company will likely not survive the blow. She knew that this would be a hard blow for him, but there was no longer room in her heart for pity for the man who was so indifferent to their marriage. Carly took a deep breath and took a sip of her iced coffee. Thousands of thoughts were spinning in her head. She remembered those moments when David was everything to her, when they made plans for the future and dreamed of children. She recalled how he supported her in law school, how they laughed and cried together. But all this was in the past. Now she had a new life before her, a new opportunity to be happy. Once she finished working on the paperwork, she filled out the final forms and sent them off to be printed. She will take them to court tomorrow morning. This would be the beginning of the end of their marriage and the beginning of a new chapter in her life. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was ready for the fight. In the evening, she met with Charlie and Barb. They were her support, and she was grateful for their help. Dinner at their house was held in a warm atmosphere. They laughed and shared stories that distracted her from her difficult thoughts. She knew that these people would always be there, no matter what happened. "You're a strong woman, Carly," Charlie said as they sat on the porch after dinner. "You will get through this and come out stronger." "Thank you, Charlie. I don't know what I would do without you and Barb," she replied, smiling. "I feel like I'm finally finding my strength and independence." "We're always here for you," Barb said, hugging her. "Do not forget it." Returning home, Carly felt light in her heart. Tomorrow a new life would begin, and she was ready for it. She opened the door of her house and walked inside, feeling the silence fill her. At that moment, she realized that this house was no longer her prison. It will be a place where she can start again. The next morning, she woke up early. The sun's rays made their way through the curtains, illuminating the room. She got up, took a shower, and dressed in a formal business suit. Taking her documents and bag, she left the house, ready for a new day. Everything went quickly in court. She submitted the paperwork, and the clerk assured her that everything would be reviewed as soon as possible. Carly felt relieved as she left the courthouse. Now everything depended on the judge and lawyers, but she knew that her affairs were in good hands. Days passed waiting for news from the court. Carly immersed herself in her work, trying not to think about what would happen next. She dated Charlie, who supported her and gave her advice. She spent her evenings with her sister and her family, finding solace in their company. One evening, while returning home from dinner at Cindy's, she received a text from a lawyer. The court scheduled a hearing for next month. It was faster than she expected, and hope flared up in her heart. She knew that this process would not be easy, but she was ready to fight for her future. When the day of the hearing arrived, Carly felt confident. She came to court holding her head high. Her lawyer was there, and she knew she had done everything she could to prepare. David was there too, but she didn't look at him. Their paths diverged, and now she looked only forward. The trial was tense. The lawyers argued, presenting evidence and arguments. Carly talked about her life with David, how their marriage fell apart, and how she was forced to take matters into her own hands to save her future. Her voice was firm and confident. David sat opposite her, listening to her words. He looked tired and depressed. She knew that he was suffering too, but her decision was inevitable. As the judge made his decision, Carly felt the tension leave her body. The judge granted her demands, and now she was free. After the hearing, she walked out of the courthouse, feeling the sun shining on her face. It was a new day, a new start. She knew that a lot of work and changes awaited her ahead, but she was ready for it. Her life was just beginning. Several months have passed. Carly moved into a new apartment, started new projects at work, and found new hobbies. Her life was filled with new meetings and events. She started running in the mornings again, enjoying the freedom and fresh air. One morning, while returning from a run, she received a text from Charlie. He invited her to dinner to celebrate her new stage in life. She gladly accepted the invitation and came to their house in the evening. Barb and Charlie greeted her with smiles and hugs. "We're proud of you, Carly," Charlie said, raising his glass. "You've been through a lot and come out stronger." "Thank you, Charlie. It wasn't easy, but I'm glad I had you," she replied, raising her glass in response. "Here's to a new life and new beginnings." The evening passed in a warm atmosphere. They laughed, reminisced about old times, and made plans for the future. Carly felt like her life was finally gaining meaning and direction. She was grateful for the support of friends and family who helped her through difficult times. When she returned home, her heart was full of joy and hope. She knew that new challenges and opportunities awaited her, but she was ready for them. She found her strength and confidence, and now nothing could stop her. Several years have passed. Carly continued to work and develop. She found new hobbies and friends. Her life was rich and interesting. She traveled, met new people, and enjoyed every minute. Her past no longer held her in its chains, and she was free. One day, while walking in the park, she met a man. His name was Michael, and he turned out to be kind, caring, and understanding. They started dating, and every day their relationship became stronger. Carly found love again, but this time she was ready to keep it and develop it. Michael was her rock and support. He understood her past and accepted her for who she is. Together, they made plans for the future and dreamed of a home full of love and warmth. Carly knew she had found her happiness. One evening, sitting by the fireplace with Michael, Carly remembered her past. She thought about David, how their lives had diverged, and how she had found her strength. She knew that her past was a part of her, but now it was only a memory. Her present and future were with Michael, and she was ready for a new stage in her life. "What are you thinking about?" Michael asked, hugging her. "About how happy I am," she answered, smiling. "Thank you for being in my life. I'm also happy that I have you," he said, kissing her forehead. "We will get through everything together, no matter what happens." Carly knew that her life was now full of joy and love. She found her strength, her happiness, and was ready for new challenges. Her past was behind her, and a bright future awaited her. Together with Michael, they built a home full of laughter and happiness. Carly found her place in this world and was grateful for every day. She knew that life could be difficult and unpredictable, but now she was ready for any challenge. Her strength and confidence helped her move forward, and she knew that with Michael they could overcome anything. Life went on, and Carly enjoyed every moment of it. She learned to appreciate the little things, enjoy simple things, and be grateful for everything she has. Her heart was full of love and warmth, and she knew that many more amazing moments and discoveries awaited her ahead. Carly and Michael were happy together. Their home was full of love and joy. They traveled, met friends, and enjoyed life. Carly continued to work and develop. Her career took off, and she was pleased with her achievements. One evening, sitting by the fireplace, Michael proposed to her. Carly was stunned, but her heart was full of joy. She knew she had found her soulmate and was ready to spend the rest of her life with him. Tears of happiness flowed down her cheeks as she said yes. Their wedding was simple and beautiful. They invited only their closest friends and family, and the day was filled with love and laughter. Carly felt like the happiest woman in the world, and her heart was full of gratitude for this new stage of life. Carly and Michael became parents. They had a son whom they named Jack. Their home was full of joy and laughter, and Carly enjoyed every moment with her family. Her life was filled with love and happiness, and she knew that she had found her place in this world. Carly continued to work, but now her priority was family. She spent more time at home, caring for Jack and supporting Michael. Their life was full of adventure and joy, and every day brought new surprises. One evening, sitting by the fireplace with Michael and Jack, Carly remembered her past. She thought about David, how their lives had diverged, and how she had found her strength. Her heart was full of gratitude for all the lessons she had learned and how life had led her to Michael and Jack. "Mom, what are you thinking about?" Jack asked, looking at her with his big eyes. "About how happy I am that I have you and Dad," she answered, smiling. "I love you more than anything in the world." "We love you too," Michael said, hugging her. "You are our treasure." Carly knew her life was full and fulfilling. She found her happiness, her strength, and her family. Now her future was bright and joyful, and she was ready for new adventures. Life went on, and Carly enjoyed every moment of it, knowing that many more amazing moments and discoveries awaited her ahead. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.